General Hospital spoilers tease that Drew and Willow had hoped that their one-year anniversary would be a celebration of everything they had endured and overcome together. A year had passed since their complicated and sometimes painful love story began, filled with moments of connection, reconciliation, and shared vulnerability. It was supposed to be a time for reflection on the progress they'd made, reaffirming their commitment to each other, a quiet evening to commemorate their shared journey and dreams of a brighter future. For Drew, it was more than just a milestone, it was an opportunity to finally put the past behind them, to demonstrate to Willow that the mistakes of his past would not define their future. For Willow, it was a chance to believe that despite the betrayals and the scars from their previous relationships, Drew was still the man she could rely on, the man she could trust, and the father she wanted by her side for their growing family. But the carefully planned evening, meant to be a moment of joy, had begun to take a darker turn. It was no secret that Drew's past had left a trail of unresolved issues, particularly his complicated relationship with Nina. And as if that wasn't enough, Tracy's growing influence in Port Charles seemed to target them both, chipping away at the foundation of their relationship. Nina's resentment toward Willow, fueled by years of bitterness and an unresolved connection to Drew, had taken root again. She wasn't content to simply let Drew and Willow move forward in peace. She needed to remind Willow of her own position in Drew's life, stirring old tensions and planting doubt at every turn. Through subtle conversations, pointed comments, and the occasional strategic move, Nina worked quietly but persistently to create cracks in their bond. On the other hand, Tracy's approach was less subtle but equally damaging. Ever the opportunist, Tracy had begun weaving her web around Drew, questioning his every move, probing his decisions, and strategically undermining his attempts to build something solid with Willow. She wasn't directly attacking their relationship, but her manipulations were effective in a more insidious way, suggesting that Drew wasn't ready for the kind of commitment Willow expected. Every time Drew tried to strengthen his relationship with Willow, Tracy was there, reminding him of his complex history, throwing doubts about Willow's loyalty, and constantly hinting that Drew was in over his head. Her persistence was becoming unbearable, and Drew could feel the weight of her influence pulling at the threads of their relationship. Willow, caught in the middle of these emotional battles, found herself torn between the love she felt for Drew and the growing distrust that these outside forces were cultivating. Despite the moments of warmth and connection with Drew, she couldn't shake the feeling that the people in their lives, especially Nina and Tracy, were determined to destroy whatever happiness they had managed to build. It seemed as if every small step forward they took in their relationship was met with 2 steps backward, as Nina's cold comments and Tracy's sly manipulations slowly poisoned their atmosphere, eroding Willow's trust. As the anniversary approached, what should have been a time of romantic celebration instead became a battleground, with Willow forced to confront the uncomfortable truths that had been buried beneath the surface. The anniversary dinner, once envisioned as a moment of joy, was now overshadowed by the lingering tension of past mistakes, hidden resentments, and the overwhelming presence of those who wanted to see their relationship fail. Drew, oblivious to the extent of the damage being done by Nina and Tracy, continued to plan for the evening with all the hope and optimism of someone trying to erase a past that refused to stay buried. His intentions were pure, but the more Willow reflected on their time together, the more she realized that there were unresolved issues that couldn't simply be forgotten with a romantic gesture. Nina's latest actions had left a bitter taste in Willow's mouth, small remarks about how Drew always had a soft spot for women who needed saving, and how their past had a way of following them, no matter how hard they tried to run. Each word felt like a dagger, not just aimed at Drew but at Willow herself. How could she ever trust Drew completely when Nina was so determined to remind her of their shared history? But it wasn't just Nina. Tracy, who had always been calculating and relentless, was now focused on undermining Drew's every move, subtly suggesting that his commitment to Willow wasn't as genuine as it seemed. With every conversation, Willow's doubts deepened, and the once unbreakable connection she had felt with Drew now seemed fragile, as if it could crumble at any moment under the weight of the secrets and manipulations that surrounded them. The cracks were starting to show. Willow found herself questioning everything, her love for Drew, his past with Nina, and whether Drew was truly capable of protecting her from the forces trying to tear them apart. Was Drew really ready to commit? Or was he just trying to avoid the loneliness and guilt he had carried with him for so long? Would they be able to overcome the lingering presence of Nina and Tracy, who were now operating like puppeteers behind the scenes, pulling strings and manipulating events to suit their own desires? As the anniversary approached, the emotional stakes were higher than ever. Willow could no longer ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. She had hoped for a fresh start, for a future with Drew, but now she wasn't so sure. Could their love survive the relentless attacks from those who seemed bent on destroying it? Could she trust Drew enough to build a life with him? Or was their relationship doomed to be another casualty of the complex web of lies, betrayals, and emotional manipulation that had plagued them from the start? The fireworks that would mark their anniversary now seemed symbolic of the explosions waiting to happen. Would they be celebratory or destructive? Would Willow find the strength to confront Drew with the truths that had been buried? Or would she allow herself to be drawn into the whirlwind of deceit and manipulation that threatened to consume them both? The anniversary dinner, once a beacon of hope, was now a crossroads, a moment that would either reaffirm their love or shatter it forever. Michael had never felt more betrayed, more isolated than in the days leading up to Drew and Willow's one-year anniversary. The love story that had begun between them, so full of passion and hope, was now poisoned by the toxic bitterness of Michael's deepening resentment and the festering wound of perceived betrayal. Drew had always been a trusted ally, a man who had stood by him through thick and thin, but now Michael saw him as nothing more than a symbol of the failures in his own life. Failures he couldn't escape. Drew's relationship with Willow, the woman Michael had loved and lost, felt like the final betrayal. It wasn't just about losing her, it was about the erosion of everything he had believed about loyalty and trust. Everything he had fought for. The jealousy that had once been subtle now consumed him, clouding his thoughts and actions, making him more volatile, more unpredictable. Michael knew that Drew had secrets that went beyond the public facades they all wore. He had always suspected something darker beneath the surface. But it wasn't until the anniversary celebrations were imminent that the full scope of Drew's past began to unravel. The whispers in the corridors. The rumors that Drew had been involved in shady dealings that threatened to collapse everything he had built, weren't just idle gossip. They were truth. And Michael could feel the walls closing in on the man who had once been his confidant. Drew's sins, buried in the past, were about to be exposed in a way that would not only destroy his relationship with Willow, but would also sever Michael's final threads of trust in him. Michael wasn't going to let it slide. The anniversary, intended to be a celebration, had become a battleground. He wasn't just going to stand by and watch Willow be swept away by Drew's charm and lies. He knew what Drew had done. What secrets he had kept hidden. His connection to Nina, his manipulations, the things he had done behind closed doors that Willow would never see. Michael had spent too many years of his life trying to protect those he loved, only to see them slip away into the hands of someone who could never truly be trusted. Drew's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a public spectacle waiting to happen, and Michael was determined to make sure it did. As the days counted down to the anniversary celebration, the tension between Michael and Drew grew palpable. Michael, caught in the throes of his own internal battle, began to act in ways that were completely out of character. He was no longer the man who could be reasoned with, who could find peace in even the most chaotic of circumstances. He had become consumed by his own rage and jealousy, willing to do whatever it took to expose Drew for the fraud he believed him to be. And as the plans for Drew and Willow's wedding day began to take shape, Michael couldn't stand idly by. He was preparing to make sure that nothing at all, could go forward without the truth coming to light. Behind the scenes, there were others pulling strings as well, those who had their own reasons for wanting to tear apart the carefully constructed image of Drew and Willow's perfect love story. People who saw the wedding not as a celebration, but as a target. These figures, some old allies of Michael, others with their own agendas, were ready to push Drew's darkest secrets into the open. They knew about the manipulation. They knew about the crimes Drew had committed, about the deals he had made in the shadows, about the things he had done to keep his reputation intact at all costs. And they were ready to use this information to bring him down. The day of the anniversary finally arrived, and with it, the undercurrents of tension grew to a boiling point. Drew, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, focused on his celebration with Willow, hoping to prove to her that he had changed, that he was worthy of her trust. But Willow, too, was beginning to see the cracks in the perfect picture. Her heart ached as she watched Drew, the man she had come to love, now the subject of whispered rumors and veiled threats. Her love for him had been tested by time, by the secrets he kept, and now, it seemed, by forces she could neither control nor fully understand. The truth about Drew was surfacing, and with it came the revelation of his darkest deeds. The anniversary celebration, once meant to be a moment of joy, erupted into chaos. Secrets long buried came rushing to the surface, Drew's past with Nina, his manipulations, and his involvement in the very crimes that had nearly destroyed the lives of those around him. The shockwave of truth hit Willow like a physical blow, and she stood frozen, unable to process the whirlwind of betrayal she had just witnessed. Her heart shattered, not only for the man she had given her love to, but for the child they had brought into this world together. Now caught in a web of lies and deception, Michael watched as everything he had feared began to unfold, as the woman he had once loved now stood before him, questioning everything about the man who had taken his place in her life. His obsession with Drew, his need to be the one to protect Willow, now felt justified in a way that terrified him. This was no longer about love, it was about ownership, about reclaiming what he had lost, even if it meant destroying the people around him in the process. The thought of Willow being taken by Drew, the thought of her trusting him again, was more than Michael could bear. He had been betrayed once before, and he would not let it happen again. But as the dust settled and the truth lay bare for all to see, one question remained: would Willow walk away from Drew for good, or would she forgive him, just as she had done in the past? Would she choose to face a future with Michael, the man who had always protected her, or would the scars of their tumultuous past keep them apart forever? In the aftermath of the explosion of secrets, Michael's actions left a trail of emotional wreckage in their wake. What had started as a quiet celebration turned into a war, one that no one could predict the outcome of. The truth had been revealed. And with it, a future full of uncertainty and pain. Michael had successfully planted the seeds of doubt, but in doing so, he had also ensured that he would be caught in the very web of destruction he had set in motion. The eruption of tension between Willow and Drew marked the beginning of something far darker than either of them had anticipated. What started as a simple disagreement, born from their fractured trust and the mounting pressure surrounding their anniversary, quickly escalated into a full-blown confrontation that shook the very foundation of their relationship. Their argument, heated and full of raw emotion, was more than just a disagreement over the past. It became a battle for control, for dominance, for power over a future that now seemed uncertain. Willow, her heart heavy with the weight of her doubts and the secrets Drew had hidden, finally reached her breaking point. Drew, desperate to hold on to the life he had built with her, failed to see how his own actions had pushed her further away. In the midst of the chaos, something shifted within them both. Willow, feeling betrayed not only by Drew's lies but also by her own inability to see through his facades, became resolute. She was no longer willing to allow Drew to manipulate her emotions. No longer willing to stay in a relationship built on shaky ground, she found herself ready to walk away, to reclaim the independence she had long sacrificed for the sake of love. But Drew, fueled by a mixture of guilt and desperation, refused to let her go. His obsession with keeping Willow in his life had reached dangerous heights, and the more she pulled away, the more he clung to the idea of a perfect family, a dream that now seemed impossible to achieve. The confrontation between them was not just a battle of words, it was a confrontation between two people who had loved each other deeply but had now reached a crossroads. And as the dust settled after their explosive fight, it became clear that their relationship would never be the same again. The secrets, the lies, and the manipulation had created a deep chasm between them, one that could not easily be crossed. What had once been a love story full of hope and possibility now felt like a tragic tale of two people drifting apart, consumed by their own fears and unresolved emotions. In the wake of the fallout, both Willow and Drew were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Willow, now filled with a sense of clarity, realized that she had to make a decision for herself and her children. She could no longer live in the shadows of Drew's secrets and manipulations. She had to protect her own heart, even if it meant walking away from the man she once thought she would spend her life with. Drew, on the other hand, was left to face the consequences of his actions. The weight of his own guilt and regret pressing down on him. His obsession with control had destroyed the very thing he cherished most, the love of the woman he had once promised to protect. But the real devastation wasn't just in their broken relationship, it was in the ripple effects that spread through their lives and those around them. As Willow distanced herself from Drew, she also found herself questioning the role of those closest to her. The once solid relationships she had with people like Carly, Jason, and even Michael now seemed uncertain. Trust, once easily given, had become something that had to be earned, and in the wake of her falling out with Drew, Willow couldn't help but wonder who she could truly rely on. Meanwhile, Drew's life began to unravel in ways he hadn't expected. The weight of his past mistakes, the lies he had told, and the people he had hurt began to catch up with him. His calculated, controlled life was now a series of broken promises and lost opportunities. The facade he had built around himself as the steadfast, loving partner was now crumbling, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. And the more he struggled to regain Willow's love, the more he pushed her further away. This was no longer just a story of betrayal, it was a tale of two people locked in a cycle of emotional destruction, unable to break free from the traps they had set for themselves. The future, once full of potential, was now uncertain and clouded with doubt. As the aftermath of their fight continued to unfold, it became clear that neither Drew nor Willow would ever be the same. The battle between them had not only changed the course of their relationship, it had set off a chain of events that would alter their lives forever. In the end, it was no longer just about love, it was about survival, about finding a way to rebuild and heal after the wounds of the past. The question remained: would Drew and Willow find a way back to each other, or had they crossed a line from which there was no return? The scars of their battle would stay with them, lingering in the background of every decision, every moment of trust, and every step forward they took in their lives. And as they each moved forward, they knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but perhaps, in the end, it would be the only way to escape the shadows of their past. Willow's decision to take Drew to court was no longer a matter of anger or betrayal, it was a calculated response to the darkness that had crept into their relationship. A necessary step to protect herself and their children from the web of lies Drew had woven around them. She had spent months trying to rationalize Drew's actions, understanding that people make mistakes, that love sometimes requires forgiveness. But there came a moment when the truth, sharp and undeniable, pierced through the veil of excuses and justifications. Drew had lied, repeatedly. Not just about his past with Nina, but about his manipulations, the subtle ways he had controlled her, steering her decisions and emotions with half-truths and carefully crafted stories. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that Drew's deceit was not just a fleeting error, it was a pattern. A deliberate strategy to keep her in the dark, to make her dependent on him, to ensure that she would never question his choices, his actions, or his past. And now, Willow had made up her mind. She would sue Drew for the emotional harm he had caused, for the lies that had not only tainted their relationship but had also impacted her ability to protect Wiley and Amelia. The decision was not made lightly, she had weighed the cost of her actions, what it would mean for her family, for their future, and for her own peace of mind. But in the end, it was the only way forward. The truth was more important than any lingering feelings of love she might have had for Drew. It was about reclaiming her autonomy, about stepping out from under the shadow of his manipulation, and about giving herself and her children the chance to heal without the constant fear of being betrayed again. Drew, however, was blind to the storm that was gathering around him. He had always been a man who could control the narrative, who could charm his way out of sticky situations. Who could manipulate the truth just enough to ensure he stayed in the driver's seat. But the walls were closing in. Willow's legal action was the first blow, but it wouldn't be the last. His past was catching up with him, and the secrets he had so carefully guarded were beginning to surface. The affair with Nina, the manipulation of Portia. The lies about his involvement with the WSB, these were not things that could be swept under the rug anymore. With Willow preparing to expose him, Drew found himself in a precarious position. One that threatened to unravel everything he had built. The money, the connections, the position in society, it was all slipping through his fingers. The worst part of it all was the realization that Drew had lost the most important thing, Willow. He had pushed her too far, lied too many times. And now she was preparing to sever the last ties that bound them together. And as much as he tried to convince himself that he could fix it, that he could salvage what little remained, he knew deep down that it was too late. Willow had seen him for what he was, and the foundation of trust they had built together had crumbled beyond repair. Now, as Drew prepared for the inevitable fallout, he was consumed by a mixture of rage, desperation, and guilt. The love he had taken for granted was slipping away. And he realized that he had no one left to turn to. The battle in court would be brutal, and even if he won, it wouldn't be enough to undo the damage he had caused. The darkness that had been creeping into his life, the guilt, the paranoia, and the self-loathing, had finally reached its peak. Drew was losing everything. His career, his family, his future. The quiet, controlled life he had once known was now a distant memory, replaced by a chaos of his own making. The haunting truth was undeniable. Drew had lost everything because of his own choices. His own actions. And as the legal battle loomed ahead, the emotional toll it would take on everyone involved was only beginning to unfold. Willow was determined to reclaim her life, her freedom, and her children's future. Drew, on the other hand, was fighting to preserve the last remnants of his shattered world. Neither of them could predict how far the consequences would reach. But one thing was certain, the truth, once unleashed, would change everything, and neither Drew nor Willow would ever be the same again.